Welcome back, guys, to MysteryCon. On this channel, I narrate conspiracy theories to help you sleep and relax. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe, and also share this video with your friends and family to help them fall asleep too. Please let me know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. Now sit back, relax, and let's begin. I couldn't shake the encounter with the man from the Keepers. His words haunted me, lingering in my mind like a shadow that wouldn't let go. They were watching me. They knew about my investigation, and yet, despite the danger, I couldn't stop. Something about the chrono key, about the manipulation of time, drove me forward. I left Marcus behind in that cold, dimly lit room with his hollow words echoing in my mind. He had betrayed me, and now he was just another pawn in the Keeper's game. But I couldn't afford to dwell on his betrayal. The truth, the heart of this conspiracy, was more important now than ever. The Keepers had been manipulating history for so long. I didn't even know where to begin to stop them. I woke up to darkness. My head was throbbing, my body aching from where the men had shoved me into the cold concrete. The events of the previous night came flooding back, the chase, the confrontation, the men in dark suits who had ambushed me. But it wasn't the pain or the fear that lingered in my mind. It was the words they had spoken. You should have left this alone. I've always been a curious person, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to uncover. My name is Dr. Ethan Keller, and I work as a physicist at the government's top research facility. We deal with cutting-edge technology and highly classified projects, but most of my work revolves around quantum mechanics and theoretical physics. Until recently, I thought I was doing normal work. Until the day I found the files. The darkness enveloped me like a thick, suffocating blanket. My ears rang, my body felt weightless, and I could no longer feel the ground beneath me. The explosion, the destruction of the chrono key, had triggered something far worse than I anticipated. The very fabric of time had unraveled, and I was caught in the middle of it, spiraling through the collapse. The days blurred together as I continued my investigation into the chrono key and the Keepers. I couldn't afford to waste time. I could feel the walls closing in around me. Every moment I spent in the lab, poring over the data, every late-night search for hidden documents felt like I was being hunted. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I still didn't know. The discovery of the chrono key's true purpose should have been a victory. But instead of feeling empowered, I felt a deep sense of dread settle in. I was no longer just uncovering a conspiracy. I was a part of it now. The Keepers were watching, and I knew they were aware that I was getting too close to the truth. The gravity of the situation was beginning to crush me, and with every new discovery, the danger escalated. I had learned enough to know that I was standing on the precipice of something I couldn't fully comprehend. The Keepers were far more dangerous than I had imagined, and every step I took brought me closer to the heart of their operation. But that night, as I tried to make sense of my next move, the confrontation I had been avoiding finally happened. The more I delved into the mystery, the more it became clear that I wasn't just dealing with an isolated secret. There was something much larger at play. I thought I had been thorough, but the deeper I went, the more questions surfaced. Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and every file I opened felt like it was tied to something bigger, more dangerous. The more I dug into the encrypted files, the more my curiosity turned into obsession. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus on my regular work. Every waking moment was spent going through the records, trying to piece together the puzzle. I found myself constantly questioning my own reality, what I had been taught about history, physics, and time itself. The more I uncovered, the more Dr. Jenna Ford's name haunted me. She was the key to understanding everything, the catalyst that set the whole project in motion. But as much as I tried to understand her role, there was always something more hidden in the shadows, something elusive and unnerving that I couldn't quite grasp. The revelation about my role in all of this hit me harder than I expected. I had been chasing a future that I didn't even know I had already shaped. The Keepers had altered the timeline, but in doing so, they had never counted on one thing: my own interference. I had been part of the solution all along, but I was only just beginning to understand the weight of that responsibility. The van was silent as we sped through the city streets. The only sound, the hum of the engine and the occasional squeak of tires against the rain-slicked pavement. My mind was still reeling from the close call in the alley and the sudden appearance of the mysterious stranger who had come to my rescue. Everything was happening so fast, too fast for me to process. I had been thrust deeper into a world I didn't fully understand, and the stakes were growing higher with every passing moment. The weight of our decision settled over me like a heavy fog. Tobias was right. Once we moved forward, there would be no going back. The Keepers were already in motion, and the closer we got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. The final pieces were in place. We were about to enter the heart of the Keepers' operations and attempt the impossible: to destroy the chrono key and stop them from reshaping the world. The weight of Tobias's words sat heavily on my shoulders, and for the first time in this entire journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The path ahead wasn't clear anymore. Everything had become a blur of conflicting choices, moral dilemmas, and impossible decisions. I was stuck between two equally dangerous realities, one where the Keepers controlled time and one where, if I acted, the entire timeline could collapse into chaos. As the man in the van continued to drive, we didn't speak for a long time. My mind raced, the implications of what he had said crashing into me like a storm. I wasn't just fighting the Keepers. I was up against my own past, my own choices, and the future they had already crafted. It felt like I was stuck between two versions of reality, and every step forward only seemed to deepen the confusion. But as I stood in the command center, staring at the map of timelines flickering on the screen, I realized we weren't just racing against the Keepers. We were racing against time itself. The longer we waited, the more the paradox would grow, and with every second, the timeline became more fragile. But something Marcus had said lingered. Time itself is fragile, Ethan. If we don't guide it, it will unravel. At first, I hadn't understood it, but now it felt like a warning, a message that everything I thought I knew about time, about history, was in danger of being lost forever. Destroying the chrono key was the only way to stop the Keepers from rewriting history, but the cost was unimaginable. Without it, there would be no way to prevent the paradox from consuming everything. Time itself could unravel, erasing every moment, every memory, every person. I had always known Dr. Ford as a brilliant, driven scientist. She was one of the top minds in the field of theoretical physics, a woman who had helped develop the foundation of the time travel project. Her disappearance had been a tragic event, one that was quickly swept under the rug. Officially, she had died in a car accident, but the more I dug, the less I believed that story. I had thought I was just uncovering the truth. But what had I really uncovered? A secret society with unimaginable power, a project that could manipulate time itself. And now, I was caught in the middle of it, unable to escape. I hadn't even fully understood the scope of the project when things took a turn. It started with strange phone calls, voices on the other end that hung up as soon as I answered, a series of unmarked cars that seemed to follow me no matter where I went. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but the signs were too clear to ignore. Someone knew what I was up to, and they were watching me. I opened my eyes, but the world around me was not the same. The air felt distorted, thick with an unfamiliar energy. I was no longer in the Keeper's stronghold. I wasn't even sure where or when I was. The ground seemed to shift under my feet, like the world was being remade with every second. Time was no longer linear, it was fractured, broken into pieces, and I was at the center of it all. It all started with a routine day. I was working late in the lab, running some simulations on time dilation, when I accidentally stumbled upon a folder buried deep within our server system. I wasn't supposed to have access to it, let alone be able to open it. The file was encrypted with several layers of security, but the more I tried to move away from it, the more my curiosity piqued. There was something about it that felt important, something that called to me. It was late when I decided to leave Dr. Ford's office. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, and mentally drained from the labyrinth of secrets I had unearthed, but I knew I couldn't afford to rest. I had uncovered too much to back out now. My hands shook as I grabbed my coat and made my way out of the building, hoping to get some fresh air and think. The city streets were eerily quiet, the night air cold against my skin, and for a brief moment I felt an odd sense of isolation. The files I had uncovered from Dr. Ford's research were extensive, but there was one section that had always eluded me: blueprints for the chrono key itself. The documents were vague, filled with complex equations and diagrams that seemed almost deliberately unclear. I had been wrestling with them for days, unable to decipher what was really being described. But one evening, as I sat in my office, surrounded by scattered papers and coffee cups, something clicked. The man driving the van, whose face was still hidden in shadows, finally spoke again. "You're being hunted, Keller," he said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying urgency. "The keepers won't stop until they've erased you from the timeline, and they'll do whatever it takes to make sure that happens." The next few days were a blur of constant paranoia. I kept my office locked, never leaving my desk without making sure no one was following me. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. It wasn't just my imagination, I was being watched. I had seen the same unmarked black cars parked outside the lab more than once, and I was beginning to notice familiar faces in the crowd. People who looked like they were keeping tabs on me. The next morning, I was back in the lab, surrounded by the scattered notes and papers I had gathered from Dr. Ford's old research. The weight of the situation was suffocating, but I knew I had to keep going. I needed more evidence. The files I had already uncovered were only the tip of the iceberg. There were more pieces of the puzzle out there, waiting to be discovered. Then, I came across something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was a message, hidden deep within one of the files, a message from someone who had been part of the project, but who seemed to have vanished. The name was familiar, Dr. Jenna Ford. I had heard of her before, but I never knew much about her. She was a brilliant physicist and one of the original researchers behind the time travel project. However, she had disappeared under mysterious circumstances about a decade ago. Her disappearance was brushed off as an accident, a tragic but unimportant event. The kind of thing people forget over time, but I wasn't alone. But if I did nothing, the keepers would reshape the world according to their own vision, and history would be lost forever. The choice wasn't as simple as right or wrong. It was about deciding what was worth saving, the present, the future, or even the past itself. But it wasn't until the night I almost didn't make it out alive that I fully realized the danger I was in. But this message wasn't an accident. It was a plea for help. Eventually, we reached an unmarked building on the outskirts of the city. The man parked the van in the shadow of the structure, and I followed him inside. The place was abandoned, with the faint smell of dust and old machinery lingering in the air. It felt like a relic from another time, perfectly fitting for the mess I was about to dive into. I couldn't help but ask the obvious question: who are you? Why are you helping me? I had heard whispers about the keepers before, just rumors really. They were always talked about in hushed tones among the top scientists, the ones who knew too much but didn't dare ask questions. It was said they were a secretive group within the government, operating outside the law, controlling and suppressing information that could shake the very foundation of society. But until that point, I had dismissed it as just another conspiracy theory. I started by decrypting the file, using the best skills I had developed over the years. As the layers came off, I realized this wasn't just another physics research file. This was different. The folder contained detailed reports and blueprints of a project I had never heard of. A project that, according to the documents, had been running for decades under the highest levels of secrecy. It was a time travel project. I started by reaching out to the few people I trusted, people who were close to Dr. Ford before she disappeared. I had to tread carefully. Every phone call, every message, every meeting could be intercepted by the keepers, but I couldn't be afraid anymore. I had come too far. I tried to move, but it felt like I was walking through thick fog, unable to grasp anything solid. I heard voices, distant whispers that seemed to echo through the void. My thoughts were a jumble, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had we succeeded? Had we failed? Was this the end of everything? I tried to push myself up, but I realized I was in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were bare, and the only source of light came from a single flickering bulb hanging overhead. I was alone, or so I thought. My eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of where I was. I was reviewing a page that seemed to repeat the same equation over and over. At first, I thought it was a mistake, just a redundant part of the blueprint, but as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a mistake at all. The pattern was part of a larger puzzle, one that Dr. Ford had left for someone to find. It was a formula, one that, when understood, could unlock the mechanism behind the chrono key. I was walking on a razor's edge, and one wrong move could change everything. I needed to understand the full scope of the project, why the keepers thought they were doing the right thing, and what they meant by guiding time. I started going through Dr. Ford's files again, desperately searching for clues that might explain the bigger picture. It wasn't just the cryptic messages she had left behind. It was the way her name was avoided in conversations about the project. It was as if she had never existed, like she was erased from history itself. And then there was the note she had left for me, her final warning. She had known the risks, had seen what the keepers were capable of, and had tried to stop them. But she had failed, and now it seemed I was her last hope. Tobias's voice cut through my thoughts. We don't have much time. The keepers are expecting us. They are already aware we found the chrono key. They'll do everything in their power to stop us. And then a figure appeared in front of me. I couldn't believe it when I saw the words. They know. They're watching. And they'll come for you too if you keep digging. Don't trust anyone. They've erased everything. Your memories, your life, your choices. But I remember everything. I followed the stranger down a long hallway, his footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. We stopped in front of a steel door, which he unlocked with a series of code taps. As the door swung open, the lights flickered on, revealing a makeshift command center. Computers lined the walls, each displaying various timelines and data points. It looked like a war room, but instead of battles, it was filled with the ghosts of history, each one waiting to be altered. I nodded, the anxiety in my chest mounting. I had been hoping for a clean solution, an easy way out. But there was no easy way. The keepers had orchestrated this from the start, pulling strings across time, manipulating history, and using the chrono key to erase any evidence of their interference. And now, it was up to us to stop them. I sat in the dimly lit command center, surrounded by the blinking screens that showed every conceivable version of reality, each one affected by the Keeper's manipulation. Each timeline was like a thread woven into a tapestry, but now that tapestry was being torn apart at the seams. The more I stared at the data, the more I realized how fragile it all was. One wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. I spent hours in Dr. Ford's old office, going through her personal journals and research papers. Most of it was dense, theoretical physics, equations that made my head spin, but there were glimpses of something darker, something that Dr. Ford had tried to bury. It wasn't just the work she had done with the chrono key. It was what she had discovered along the way. It was late, around midnight, when I decided to head home. I had been poring over Dr. Ford's notes for hours, trying to figure out how to use the chrono key. My mind was racing, overwhelmed with the gravity of the situation. As I walked out of the lab building, I felt the familiar sense of being watched. I turned around but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the empty street and the distant glow of the city. My first contact was a former colleague of Dr. Ford's, a researcher named Samuel Ruiz. He had been a part of the early experiments, but his role had always been ambiguous. According to the official reports, he had left the project abruptly, citing personal reasons, but I had my doubts. I arranged to meet him in a quiet cafe outside the city, hoping to get some answers. That is, until I saw them for myself. That's when I found it. That's when I saw him. Dr. Marcus Lyle. The idea of time travel had always been a topic of theoretical debate, something that belonged in science fiction, not reality, but these documents told a different story. There were references to successful experiments, detailed accounts of time travel devices, and reports that seemed to be from people who had witnessed the impossible. My mind raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of uncovering something enormous, something that could change everything. The man's eyes flickered to me for a moment before he focused back on the road, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I'm not the one you should be asking about," he said cryptically, "but it's time you knew the truth. Time isn't just being manipulated. It's being controlled by forces far beyond anything you can imagine." The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, slow and deliberate, sending a ripple of tension through my spine. At first, I tried to dismiss it. I was just paranoid, too caught up in everything I had learned. But as the footsteps grew closer, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. With trembling hands, I grabbed a piece of paper and began working through the equations. The more I translated, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary scientific device. The chrono key wasn't just a time machine. It was a control mechanism for time itself. It had the ability to not only travel through time, but to alter it. The device could selectively erase or insert events, changing the course of history with just a flick of a switch. As I read through the files, I started to notice strange discrepancies in history. Events that had been recorded in textbooks didn't quite match up with what was being described in the documents. There were historical moments that had been altered, and the reasons behind these changes weren't explained, at least not in the public records. What struck me most were the cryptic messages in the margins of the reports. They were written in a language I couldn't understand, but they clearly referenced something larger, a shadow organization that had been manipulating time itself. Dr. Ford had known the truth. The Keepers weren't just trying to control history. They had been manipulating time from the very beginning, using their power to shape events to fit their own vision. But as her research advanced, she had realized something horrifying. The more they altered time, the more unstable reality became. The paradox wasn't just an abstract idea, it was the real danger of time manipulation. His words sent a chill down my spine. I had known the Keepers were powerful, but the way he spoke made it clear that I hadn't even begun to scratch the surface of what was really happening. I froze. "I need to know who you are," I said, finally breaking the silence that had hung between us. "And why you're helping me." I turned a corner, picking up my pace. My heart was pounding in my chest as the realization hit me. I was being followed in one of the oldest blueprints hidden within the data. I stumbled upon a diagram that was completely different from the others. It wasn't just a model of the chrono key, it was a map, but not a map of space. This was a map of time itself. The blueprint depicted a network of timelines, each one diverging at specific points, creating an infinite web of possibilities. It was as if the walls of my office were closing in on me. The cryptic message raised more questions than it answered. Who was they? What did Dr. Ford mean by "they've erased everything"? And how could she have known about the project, especially after all these years? It was impossible to ignore. The message was a warning, one that begged me to stop. It was late one night when I first encountered them. I had been reviewing Dr. Ford's notebook again, desperately trying to make sense of the chrono key when I felt the familiar prickle of being watched. Looking up, I saw a man standing just outside my office door. He wasn't a researcher. He wasn't part of any team I recognized. His face was cold, emotionless, as though he was waiting for something. When I made eye contact, he didn't move. He just stared. It was Tobias, or at least someone who looked like him. His face was familiar, but there was something different about him. The confident, steady man who had led us this far was gone. In his place was a stranger, his eyes filled with sorrow and uncertainty. The ramifications were overwhelming. I felt the weight of what I had discovered settling on me like a ton of bricks. The keepers weren't just manipulating time, they were rewriting it entirely. The very fabric of reality was at risk. Every historical event, every decision could be altered at their discretion, all in service of their vision of the world. I wasn't just dealing with a small secret. I was up against a force that could reshape everything we knew. Then, out of nowhere, a man stepped into my path. Tobias had been patient, watching me struggle with the decision. He knew what was at stake, and he knew how hard this was for me. He had made his choice long ago, but for me it was different. I was tied to this. I had been part of the timeline, part of the history the keepers had altered without my knowledge. The weight of it all felt suffocating, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake by getting involved at all. We gathered the team, those who had survived the battle against the keepers, those who were willing to sacrifice everything to fight for the truth. They were a mix of former researchers, underground operatives, and people who had once been allies of the keepers. But now, they had all turned against them. Together we were going to face the greatest challenge of our lives. When I arrived, Ruiz was already sitting at a corner table, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He looked around nervously as if afraid of being followed. As I approached, he gave me a quick nod, his eyes scanning the room for anyone who might be watching. But I couldn't stop. The question of who Dr. Ford was really became the driving force behind my investigation. There had to be more to her disappearance than the official story. What was she trying to tell me? Why had she hidden this message in such a bizarre way? And why had she warned me? But one of those timelines was different. It was marked with a bold red X, and written beside it were the words, "The Paradox." But there was more. Hidden within the calculations, buried beneath layers of encryption, I found a personal note from Dr. Ford herself. It wasn't a message directed at anyone. It was a personal confession, written in a moment of clarity. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He was tall, with dark hair and a hard, cold look in his eyes. I didn't recognize him, but there was something about him that made my pulse quicken. He was wearing a suit, one of those dark, well-tailored ones that looked out of place in the dead of night. And his expression, it wasn't just cold, it was calculating. I quickened my steps, trying to outrun whoever it was, but the shadow at my back only drew closer. I could hear the steady rhythm of their footsteps matching mine. My mind raced. Who could it be? Was it the keepers? Had they found me already? I was drawn deeper into the mystery. The more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't just an isolated project. This was a coordinated effort with far-reaching implications for the future. I couldn't help but wonder who was behind this and why was this knowledge kept hidden for so long. In one of her journals, I found a passage that sent chills down my spine. It read, Marcus was someone I had trusted, someone I had worked closely with on the same project. We had collaborated for years, sharing ideas and insights into the theoretical foundations of time travel. He had always been a friend, a colleague I respected. But now, seeing him here in this cold, sterile room, with a look of guilt and unease in his eyes, I wasn't sure what to believe. The man turned to face me, his face grim. My name is Tobias. I'm part of a group that's been fighting the Keepers for years. We're not the only ones, but we're the last line of defense. We've been trying to undo the damage they've done, but it's hard to fight an enemy that controls time itself. The plan was simple. Breach the Keeper stronghold, access the chrono key and destroy it before it could be used again. But there was one critical variable we couldn't control. The Keepers had likely set traps. They would know we were coming, and they would be prepared to stop us at all costs. We're too late, Tobias said, his voice heavy with regret. The paradox has already begun. Time is collapsing, and there's no way to stop it. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward in my seat, my pulse quickening with a mix of fear and curiosity. What are the Keepers really after? You don't have to decide now, Tobias said, breaking my thoughts. But the longer we wait, the harder it will be. The Keepers are already making their final moves. We don't have much time. You're digging too deep, Geller, Ruiz said before I even sat down. His voice was hushed, his tone serious. You have no idea what you're messing with. As we approached the building, an imposing structure hidden in plain sight, Tobias led the way, his expression unreadable. We had no idea what we were walking into, but we couldn't hesitate. We were running out of time, and every moment that passed brought the paradox closer to becoming a reality. He didn't respond at first, but his presence alone was enough to make my skin crawl. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could feel the urgency in his voice, the same urgency I had felt when I first uncovered the truth. We were on borrowed time, and every second that passed brought us closer to the moment when the paradox would break everything apart. I felt a chill run down my spine as I looked at the timeline. The paradox wasn't just an event. It was a fracture in time. A moment when everything could unravel, where every timeline could collapse into chaos. I had always prided myself on being a logical, science-driven person. But as I stared at the screen, the pieces started falling into place in a way that defied logic. This wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a conspiracy. I needed to find out more about her, and I had to do it fast. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there had to be more than just hidden files. There had to be physical evidence of the time travel experiments that could tie everything together. I raised an eyebrow. So, you're part of the resistance? I sat down across from him, trying to remain calm despite the growing anxiety in my chest. I need to know what happened to Dr. Ford, I said, leaning in slightly. I think she knew something about the chrono key, about what the Keepers are doing. She left behind a message for me. I need answers. I shook my head in disbelief. What do you mean? We destroyed the chrono key. That should have been enough. I turned another corner, now fully running, and dashed down a narrow alley, hoping to lose whoever was tailing me. The alley was dark, with only a faint glow from a street lamp at the far end. As I pushed forward, I could feel the presence behind me intensify, each step growing closer, the tension thickening with every second. I was wrong, the note began. The chrono key isn't just a tool, it's a weapon, and I fear that if the keepers continue their work, they will destroy everything. I've tried to stop them, but they are too powerful. If you find this, you must stop them before it's too late. The man took a deep breath before responding, his eyes flicking over to me briefly. The keepers are trying to create a world where they control everything, where they can shape history to fit their vision. They aren't just altering the past, they're laying the foundation for a future that's already been decided. They've been manipulating key moments in time for years, trying to make sure their version of the world comes to pass. But they don't realize something crucial. They've already set in motion their own destruction. The more I understand the chrono key, the more I realize it is not just a tool of time travel. It is a weapon that can destroy everything. If the keepers continue their work, they will cause a temporal collapse. The fabric of time itself will tear apart, and nothing will remain. What the hell is going on, Marcus? I demanded, my voice hoarse from the encounter. Why did they bring me here? What do they want? You're Dr. Keller, aren't you? He said, his voice low and steady, like he already knew the answer. Are you sure we can stop them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. If we destroy the chrono key, what happens to time? What happens to everything we know? Atterford had understood the danger better than anyone. But she had also understood something else. The keepers weren't trying to destroy time. They believed they were saving it. To them, the temporal collapse was inevitable, but they saw it as a necessary sacrifice to bring about their vision of the future, a future where they had total control. He nodded, but his expression remained grim. It should have been. But the keepers didn't just manipulate history, Keller. They created the paradox. They set in motion a process that can't be undone. And when you destroyed the chrono key, you triggered the final phase. The collapse of time, the destruction of everything. I had always known that time travel was risky. It was a delicate thing, manipulating something so fundamental to reality. But now I was seeing it with my own eyes. The keepers didn't just want to control time, they were protecting it. In their mind, they were the guardians of history, ensuring that events unfolded in a specific, predestined way. But they were also walking a razor-thin line, risking everything for the sake of their vision. I know what you're looking for, Dr. Keller, and I'd advise you to stop. I looked over my shoulder at the team, my heart pounding. They were determined, but I could see the fear in their eyes. This wasn't just a mission. It was our last chance to save the world. The weight of that responsibility hung over us all. We weren't just fighting for our survival. We were fighting to restore the timeline, to prevent history from being rewritten. I needed to know more. I had to know who was behind this and what they intended to do with such powerful technology. But I also knew that diving deeper into this could lead me down a dangerous path. If these people didn't want the truth to be known, they would stop at nothing to ensure I stayed quiet. I reached the end of the alley, and as I turned to look behind me, I caught a glimpse of a tall figure. Before I could react, a strong hand shot out from the shadows, grabbing my arm and pulling me into the darkness. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. How can they not realize it? How could they be so blind? I took a step back, my heart starting to race. Something about this didn't feel right. Who are you? I asked, my voice betraying a hint of panic I couldn't hide. Marcus stepped forward, his expression conflicted. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. His hands were shaking and I could see that his jaw was clenched, as though he was struggling with something deep inside. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Ruiz hesitated, glancing around again. Ford! She was one of the best. She knew too much. That's why they had to get rid of her. You don't understand, Keller. This project, it wasn't just about exploring time, it was about controlling it. And the Keepers, they're not just some rogue group. They're part of something far older, something that goes back centuries. The next day I decided to visit Dr. Ford's old research lab. The place was abandoned and it felt like stepping into a forgotten piece of history. The air was thick with dust and old papers scattered across desks. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I walked around the space, I found a locked drawer in her desk that hadn't been opened in years. My heart raced as I broke the lock open, desperate to find something, anything that could explain Dr. Ford's message. The weight of her words hit me hard. Dr. Ford had known the consequences. She had tried to stop them, and now, it seemed, she had failed. She had been right about the Keepers. They were not just guarding history, they were manipulating it for their own gain, and they wouldn't stop until they had total control. Tobias nodded. In a way, but it's more complicated than that. The Keepers have far more influence than you can imagine. They've been controlling events for centuries, shaping the world into their image. They've created their own future and they're working towards something much bigger than just maintaining power. They want to control the entire flow of history. And so I made a decision. I couldn't let it go. I had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Dr. Ford had tried to warn them. She had tried to stop the project, but the Keepers had already seen her as a threat. Her warnings had fallen on deaf ears and the project continued. The more I read, the more it became clear. Dr. Ford hadn't disappeared because of an accident. She had been silenced. The Keepers had made sure of it. I absorbed his words slowly, trying to understand the full scope of the situation. And you're saying we can stop them? I could feel the weight of his words. I had known the project was dangerous, but hearing it from someone who had been so close to Dr. Ford made it real. The Keepers were no mere secret organization. They were protectors of something far more powerful. I felt the ground beneath me shift again, as though the world was slipping out of place. Is there any way to fix it? Can we restore the timeline? I had to stop them. I had to destroy the chrono key before they could use it to shape the world to their will. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a simple technological problem. This was a moral one. The Keepers had already manipulated time to a degree I couldn't even comprehend. How could I possibly stop them? How could I erase their influence from history? I struggled, but the grip was unyielding. You've been digging into things that you don't understand, a voice growled. It was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge of menace in it. My pulse raced as I struggled to break free, but the man was too strong. The Keepers warned you, Dr. Keller, he continued. You should have stopped. Now, you're going to regret this. Inside there were more documents, more equations, and a notebook that seemed to contain personal notes about the project. But it was one particular note that caught my attention. Scrawled in Dr. Ford's handwriting were 2 words. Chrono key. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I've been sent to ensure that you don't get any further, he said, and I could hear the threat behind his words. The man's lips tightened and he sighed deeply. Because they're blinded by their own ambition. They think they're saving the world. They think they're protecting time itself. But in doing so, they've created a paradox. Every change they make, every piece of history they alter, destabilizes the timeline more. They're pushing time toward a breaking point, a moment where everything collapses. The paradox was their fail-safe, a way to ensure that no matter how much they changed, the timeline would always correct itself. But what if the paradox wasn't just a safeguard? What if it was a ticking time bomb, waiting to tear apart everything they had built? The way he said it wasn't threatening. It was matter of fact. like it was a simple suggestion, and yet the weight of it felt like a warning, an order. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know who he was or how much he knew, but it was clear he was connected to the project in some way. He wasn't just another government agent. He was part of something bigger, something far darker. Tobias looked at me, his expression hardening. I wish I had a better answer for you, Keller. But I can't promise that everything will be fixed. All I know is that if we don't act, the keepers will succeed, and when they do, everything will be rewritten. Everything you've fought for, everything you've known, will be gone. Tobias moved swiftly, leading us through the hallways, his eyes scanning every corner. The building felt eerily quiet, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for us to make our move. But I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. The keepers had eyes everywhere, and they would be watching us as we made our way deeper into the heart of their operations. You shouldn't have come this far, Ethan, he said, his voice low. I told you to stop. You didn't listen. A wave of realization washed over me, and the pieces finally began to click into place. The paradox, I whispered. The keepers are the ones causing it. They're trying to control time, but they're making things worse. They're about to destroy everything they've worked for. Before I could react, he lunged. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body froze. He grabbed my arm and yanked me toward him with surprising strength. I managed to twist free, but I knew I wasn't going to get away that easily. This wasn't just some random thug. This was someone who knew exactly who I was and what I was doing. Her death wasn't just tragic, it was deliberate. And now, they were coming for me too. I could barely comprehend what he was saying. You knew about the keepers? You knew about the project? I didn't recognize the voice, but something about it felt familiar. Another agent of the keepers, I realized. My mind raced with options, but there was no easy way out. I was trapped. I had no idea what it meant at the time, but something about it felt important. In the context of all the other files I had uncovered, the chrono key sounded like the key to everything. The key to understanding why time travel wasn't just possible, but had already been achieved. The notes also referenced something even more disturbing. The concept of controlled history. According to the notes, the project wasn't just about exploring time. It was about manipulating it, changing events in the past to alter the present and the future. I needed to know more. I had to understand the full extent of what they were trying to do and what would happen if the paradox were triggered. I wasn't sure if I was ready for the answers, but I had no choice. I was in too deep. I stood there for a long time, staring at the page, my mind racing with possibilities. But in the back of my mind, a terrifying thought began to form. Could the chrono key be used to fix things? If I had access to it, could I undo the damage that the keepers had already done? The idea of destroying the chrono key, the only tool that could stabilize time, terrified me. But Tobias was right. I had seen enough to know that if the keepers got what they wanted, there would be no future to save. History would be bent to their will, and no one would remember the truth. Tobias was quiet for a moment before answering. We have to stop them. If we don't, they'll continue rewriting history and no one will remember the original timeline. We'll all become nothing more than ghosts, lost to a future that never existed. Tobias's face softened and he stepped closer. There's one way, but it requires a sacrifice. You can either restore the timeline, but in doing so you'll erase everything you've done, everything you've fought for. Or you can embrace this new world, the world created by the paradox, and let the keepers win. It's your choice, Keller. We reached the central chamber, a vast, cold room that seemed to stretch on forever. At its center was the chrono key, pulsing with energy, suspended in a glass case. The room was illuminated by a dim, ethereal glow. and the air felt thick with the weight of power. "What do you want?" I asked, standing up and moving closer. My curiosity had gotten the better of me. I had to know who these people were. "Why did you leave?" I asked. "Why didn't you stop them?" As I continued digging through the files, I found more disturbing details. The keepers weren't just manipulating events from the past. They were also experimenting with the future. They had figured out a way to influence decisions not yet made, actions not yet taken. It wasn't just about reacting to time, but controlling it before it even happened. As I pieced together the details, a sickening realization took hold. Dr. Ford hadn't just been a scientist caught up in something she didn't fully understand. She had been a whistleblower, someone who had tried to stop a disaster before it was too late. But her death had been the price of silence. And now I was walking down the same path. But before we could make a move, a voice rang out. But that was a dangerous question, one that would change everything. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes darkening. "I couldn't stop them, Keller. The keepers are everywhere. They control history. Everything. They've been using time travel to alter events, to shape the world the way they want it. And if you're not careful, they'll erase you too." I left because I didn't want to end up like Ford. He nodded slowly, his eyes avoiding mine. "I was part of it, but it's not what you think. The keepers, they're not just controlling time for personal gain. They're protecting it. Time itself is fragile, Ethan. If we don't guide it, if we don't control it, history will unravel. It's bigger than you or me. The work we did, it's not just for science. It's to keep everything from collapsing." He smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was something else. A predator sizing up its prey. I bolted down the street, adrenaline flooding my veins. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps fast and deliberate, getting closer with every second. I didn't dare look back, but I knew I wouldn't make it much farther. I staggered back, my mind racing. The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. Everything I'd worked for, everything I had risked, it could all be gone. The paradox had already changed everything. If I chose to restore the timeline, I would undo everything. My actions, the people I had fought with, the history we had tried to protect, they would cease to exist. But if I embraced this new world, the keepers would have won. They would reshape everything in their image, and the timeline would remain broken. Forever. I stood up, my heart heavy with the burden of the decision. But what if we fail? What if the paradox takes everything with it? I was no longer just investigating a scientific breakthrough. I was uncovering a conspiracy to rewrite history itself. "Let me go," I snapped, my voice tight with anger and fear. "You won't get away with this. I know what you're doing. I know what the chrono key is. I know about the paradox." The man nodded. "Exactly. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that they've already set up a fail-safe. A way to ensure that even if everything goes wrong, they can fix it. They've created a new version of history, one where they remain in power, a history where they are the rulers of the world and everyone else is just a pawn. The problem is, they've forgotten one crucial thing. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. We were fighting not just for the present or the future, but for the past itself, everything that had ever been. But there was something else beneath Tobias's words, something I couldn't quite place. His grip tightened. "The more you know, the more dangerous you become," he said quietly, his tone almost regretful, as if he was sorry I had come this far. His words didn't make sense. It was like he was speaking in riddles, trying to justify something that felt completely wrong. I couldn't wrap my head around it. "You're telling me you've been part of this? Part of rewriting history? Of controlling people's lives?" His words sent a chill down my spine. The keepers weren't just manipulating history. They were rewriting it to to fit their vision of the world, and they would stop at nothing to maintain control. I felt a cold, hollow emptiness inside. How could I make this decision? How could I choose between two equally devastating outcomes? I knew I had to decide what to do. The revelation was both terrifying and exhilarating, but it also left me with more questions than answers. Could I really undo the manipulation of time, or would it just lead to even worse consequences? I wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. The truth was more dangerous than I could ever have imagined. I leaned forward, my heart racing. What's that? I stared at the page in front of me, the weight of the discovery settling heavily on my shoulders. Dr. Ford had given her life to expose the truth, and now I had to finish what she started. The keepers were manipulating time, reshaping the future to suit their vision. But they didn't realize that their actions had already set in motion the very collapse they feared. My mind raced as I thought about the implications. If the keepers had the power to control the future, then they could shape the world into whatever they wanted. They could create a world that suited their agenda. A world where they were the rulers and everyone else was just a puppet in their game. Suddenly, the room felt colder. A creeping dread washed over me. Someone didn't want this information getting out. I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but I knew that I was already too involved to turn back. Tobias's eyes softened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in his gaze. There's always a risk, but you have to ask yourself, what are you fighting for? A timeline that's already been altered beyond recognition? Or a chance to set things right, no matter the cost? Turning a corner, I saw an alleyway up ahead. I darted down it, desperate for any kind of escape. As I reached the end of the alley, I felt a sharp pain in my side, a blow from the man who had been chasing me. I staggered, almost falling, but I managed to keep my footing. You're getting too close, Dr. Keller. You have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes. The keepers have been watching you. They've been watching everyone who gets too close to the truth. You're not special. You're expendable. You're not telling me everything, I said, narrowing my eyes. What aren't you saying? You've come this far, Dr. Keller. But you're too late. Before I could react, he shoved me hard into the alley wall, knocking the air out of my lungs. The world spun for a moment, the impact disorienting. As I struggled to regain my footing, I saw a flash of movement. A dark figure sprinting toward us. But there was a catch. Every time they altered the timeline, the paradox grew stronger. The more they meddled with time, the more unstable the fabric of reality became. At some point, the timeline would snap, and when that happened, everything would fall apart. Every event, every life, every memory would become nothing more than an erased ripple in the chaos. He hesitated. There's more at stake than just saving history, Keller. The keepers aren't just manipulating time. They've created something that's tied to the very fabric of reality. And they're using the chrono key to access it. I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice shaking now. They'd been watching me for years. I was too deep into it. We all were, and now you're too deep too. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was being hunted, and the keepers weren't just interested in silencing me. They wanted me gone. I had to learn more about the chrono key, and fast, but I also had to be careful. There were forces out there, forces far more powerful than I could imagine, that would do anything to keep the truth buried. I had to stop them. I had to find a way to prevent the paradox from happening, but I wasn't sure I could do it alone. I pressed him for more details about the chrono key and the technology behind it. Rui seemed reluctant to talk further, but the fear in his eyes was enough to convince me that I was on the right path. He spoke in hushed tones, telling me about how the chrono key had been created, a device capable of opening portals to the past. But it wasn't just for observation. The keepers were using it to manipulate key moments in time, to ensure their power and influence remained unchallenged. I took a step back, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. The keepers weren't just some small faction. They were powerful, controlling something that reached beyond the boundaries of our world, beyond even time itself. And they were willing to kill to keep their secrets safe. I turned to see the leader of the keepers standing at the far end of the room, a smug smile on his face. His voice was calm, almost bored, as though he had been expecting this moment all along. "You've been a thorn in our side for far too long. But this is where it ends." The discovery had opened a door to a world I couldn't ignore, but it had also placed me on a path I might not be able to turn back from. The man glanced at me, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. "They've created a version of the future where they're the victors, but they've also made sure that no one else can stop them. They've ensured that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you fight, they win." The question lingered in the air, heavy and unresolved. I didn't have all the answers, but I did know this. The timeline had already been compromised. History had already been rewritten, and the longer we waited, the harder it would be to reclaim the world as it was. Tobias's voice broke through my thoughts again. "You're the one who has to choose, Keller. It's always been your decision. You've been the one shaping the timeline from the start. The future, the past, it's all tied to you. What will you do?" As I continued to run, my thoughts raced. Who were these people? How had they found me? And why did they want to stop me so badly? The answers were starting to reveal themselves, and each one was more terrifying than the last. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them win. Dr. Ford had warned me. She had tried to stop the keepers before they destroyed everything, but she had failed. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me. The timeline, the future, was no longer just a set of events that played out naturally. It was a battleground, a place where choices mattered. My choices. I couldn't let that happen. I felt a cold sweat breaking out across my brow as I processed his words. The keepers weren't just altering the past. They had already written the future. And no one, not even someone with the chrono key, could stop them from enforcing their version of reality. The timeline had already been manipulated so much that it seemed impossible to change it back. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What are you talking about? What have they created?" I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. I had always trusted Marcus. He was the one person I thought would never betray me. But now he was telling me that he had been a part of the very organization I had been fighting against. The Keepers. Worse, he was telling me that he had helped manipulate history, helped shape the world in ways I couldn't even fathom. I took a step forward, my resolve hardening. "You're the ones who will end. You've manipulated time, altered history, and created a world that's nothing more than a lie. But we're ending it. Right here, right now." I turned to face him, my resolve firming up as I made my decision. We fight. We fight to set things right. We destroy the chrono key and stop the keepers, no matter what happens. In the next instant, the stranger who had grabbed me was gone, shoved aside as a figure wearing a long coat moved in front of me. The newcomer was fast, too fast. I had no idea what was happening, but the man who had been holding me was now on the ground, groaning in pain. The stranger reached down, pulling me away from the scene. "They've been changing things for years, Keller," Ruiz continued. "Subtle changes, little things that people never notice, but those changes, they add up. And now, they're planning something big, something that will alter the course of history for good. If they succeed, there will be no going back." "Who are they?" I demanded, my voice shaking. As the hours passed, I began to piece together the full scope of the project. The keepers weren't just trying to control time. They were on the verge of creating a world where they held all the power. But in doing so, they were setting the stage for their own destruction. I knew then what I had to do. I reached the end of the alley, only to find my path blocked by 2 more men, both dressed in dark suits, just like the first. They moved in on me quickly, their faces cold and emotionless. "Is there any way to stop them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Move. Now," the stranger commanded, not even looking back. His voice was low but urgent. Now it was my turn. The leader's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "You think you can stop us? You think you can erase everything we've worked for? You're nothing, Keller. You're just a footnote in a timeline that will soon be erased." The man's face remained stoic. "We are the ones who protect the timeline. We are the ones who ensure history is what it's supposed to be. You think you can undo that? You think you can expose the truth without consequences? You're wrong." The weight of his words settled over me like a thick fog. The keepers weren't just controlling the past. They were reshaping the future, and I was caught in the middle of it. Tobias looked at me, his expression conflicted. A new version of reality. One where they control everything, where they can erase entire timelines and replace them with whatever they want. If they succeed, no one will even remember the original world. It will be like we never existed. Tobias nodded solemnly, his expression unreadable. "I'll help you, but once we do this, there's no turning back. If we fail, if the paradox is triggered, nothing will remain. Are you ready for that? You're a part of it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the weight of his betrayal hitting me like a ton of bricks. "You've been part of this all along, and now you're just gonna let them destroy everything?" Before I could react, he turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the shadows of the lab. I stood there, frozen, trying to process everything he had just said. The keepers weren't just a shadowy conspiracy. They were actively controlling history, shaping it, and they were willing to kill anyone who got in their way. I was no longer just a scientist. I was an enemy. "Dr. Keller," one of them said, his voice calm but filled with menace. "You've been very persistent, but your time is up." "I can't stop now," I said, more to myself than to Ruiz. "I have to know how to stop them." I didn't hesitate. I have to be. I realized that stopping them wasn't just about defeating an organization. It was about preventing the end of everything. About saving not just the present, but the future and the past. The paradox wasn't just a risk. It was the endgame. I took a deep breath and looked up at Tobias. "I can't let the keepers win. We've already lost so much, and I'm not going to let them erase everything. I'm going to restore the timeline, even if it means losing everything we fought for. At least we'll have a chance at a future." Marcus looked away, his face a mask of guilt. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to be a part of their plans. But it's too late now. If you go up against them, they'll erase you, Ethan. They'll erase everything." Still reeling from the sudden turn of events, I hesitated for a split second before my instincts kicked in. I ran, following the stranger through winding alleyways and narrow streets. I had no idea where we were headed, but all I could think about was escaping the clutches of the keepers. The idea of a reality where the keepers held total control was terrifying. It wasn't just about altering the past or future. It was about erasing every trace of the world I knew, replacing it with a new one designed to suit their needs. The man didn't answer immediately. He continued driving, the silence between us growing thicker. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice grim. "There is one way, but it's gonna cost you everything." With a flick of his hand, The glass case holding the chrono key shattered, and the device hummed with a powerful, almost dangerous energy. The leader stepped toward the chrono key, his fingers outstretched, as if ready to harness its power once again. But that's when everything shifted. The room seemed to ripple, as if time itself was warping around us. I realized with a jolt that the paradox was already starting. The very fabric of reality was being torn apart, and the keepers were too blind to see it. They had pushed too far. They had already altered time beyond repair. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else. The chrono key wasn't just a tool for traveling through time. It was a weapon, one that could potentially stop the paradox before it ever had a chance to destroy everything. But what terrified me the most was the realization that they knew about me. The keepers had been watching me for longer than I had known. They had been aware of my investigation, my questions, my discoveries. They knew I was getting too close to something they wanted to keep buried. I had no idea how to fight against that. How could you fight something so vast, so powerful, that it could reshape reality itself? I knew I had no choice. I had to fight back, or I wouldn't make it out of this alive. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What's the price? Ruiz's eyes softened with what seemed like pity. I don't know how you're going to do it, Keller, but you need to be careful. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it gets. The keepers will do anything to protect the secret. The coldness in his words hit harder than any physical blow. I had believed in him, trusted him, but he had turned against me, just like the keepers had. Tobias stepped aside, motioning to the control center's map of timelines. Then let's finish what we started. Tobias's face softened and he nodded. I understand. It's a hard choice, but it's the only one that matters. We didn't stop running until we reached a small, unmarked van parked under the shadow of a bridge. The man unlocked the door, gesturing for me to get inside. I had no choice but to follow, and I was just getting started. But if I was going to use it, I would have to be careful. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and the entire timeline could collapse. I had to be strategic. I had to think ahead. The future of the world depended on my next move. He met my gaze briefly, his eyes full of sorrow. You're going to have to go back to the moment when everything changed. The key to stopping the keepers isn't in the future or even the past. It's in the moment they first altered the timeline. If you can stop them there, you can undo everything they've done. You can reset the timeline. I climbed into the van, still trying to process what had just happened. The man followed, sliding the door shut behind him. He didn't speak immediately, his hands resting on his lap as he looked out at the street. It felt like I was caught between worlds, between the people who wanted to control time and the ones who were trying to stop them. I couldn't wait any longer. I ran toward the chrono key, my heart pounding in my chest. Now, I yelled to Tobias and the team, we have to destroy it now. I left the cafe with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to back down. The keepers had their fingers in every pie, and I had just uncovered a small part of their plan, but I couldn't let them win. Not when I was so close to exposing the truth. I tried to stand, but the room seemed to tilt as the dizziness from the previous night's beating returned. So, that's it then, I said, my voice full of anger. You've just given up? You've sold us out, Marcus, all for the sake of this agenda. There's only one way to stop them, Tobias said, his voice steady now. We need to destroy the chrono key. Without it, they can't control time. They can't alter history. We both knew what was at stake. The battle wasn't just against the keepers, it was against time itself. But I had made my choice. There would be no future if the keepers won, and I couldn't let that happen. With a burst of energy, I pushed forward, slamming into one of them with everything I had. For a moment I thought I might break through, but then I felt a sharp pain in my chest as the other man tackled me to the ground. I struggled, my mind racing to think of an escape. With that I stepped forward, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. I reached out, touching the heart of the paradox, the broken piece of time that had caused this mess. The energy coursed through me, overwhelming my senses as I felt time itself unraveling. But how can I do that? How do I know when the moment is? I asked, my mind spinning with the impossibility of it all, but it was no use. They were too strong, too coordinated. As they pinned me to the ground, one of them leaned down, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped back, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. I never wanted to be part of this, but now I am, and you can't stop them. They'll stop you first, and they'll make sure no one ever knows what happened. They'll rewrite you out of existence if they have to. I pressed forward, willing to give up everything to set things right. The light that surrounded me grew brighter, consuming everything in its path. The choice was made. The timeline would be restored. The world would reset. I shook my head, disbelief flooding through me. But the chrono key is the only way to stop the paradox. If we destroy it, everything could collapse. Time itself might. I wasn't sure how I was going to pull it off, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't do it alone. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be clean, but it was the only chance we had left to restore some semblance of order to a timeline on the verge of collapsing. Tobias's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Keller, no. If we destroy the chrono key now, we'll trigger the full collapse. You don't know who I am, do you? He asked, finally breaking the silence. And in that moment, as the light enveloped me, I felt the weight of my decisions lift. The future, whatever it held, was in the hands of those who would come after me. But I knew I had done the right thing. I had given everything for a chance at a better tomorrow. And with that, the countdown began. The final confrontation with the keepers was on the horizon, and no matter what happened, we were committed to stopping them, even if it meant sacrificing everything we knew. But it was too late. The paradox was already in motion. If we didn't act, everything would be lost. I know, Tobias interrupted, his voice cold. But we're past the point of no return. If we don't destroy it, the keepers will finish what they started, and there won't be a future left to save. I shook my head. No, should I? The cold weight of his words settled over me, sinking deep into my chest. I had hoped that Marcus would be the one person who could help me take down the keepers, but instead, he had become one of them. He was as much a part of the system as the people who had ambushed me the night before. The man's lips twitched, almost as if he was about to smile, but the expression quickly faded. You've already been to that moment, Keller. You were there before, but you didn't know it. You were part of the original timeline before the keepers altered it, and now you have to return to where it all began. You should have left this alone, Dr. Keller. You have no idea how much trouble you've caused. I closed my eyes, a sense of helplessness washing over me. I had uncovered the truth, but now, it seemed, the truth was going to cost me everything. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, a hot rage that fueled my every word. I don't care what it takes, Marcus. I will stop them. I don't care if I have to burn this whole thing to the ground. I felt my stomach churn as the implications hit me. You mean I've already been a part of this? I've already changed history without knowing it? I stood there, trying to make sense of his words. Destroying the chrono key was the only way to stop the keepers, but it was also the only way to prevent the paradox from destroying everything. It felt like there was no good option, like the moment we made a choice, we were bound to lose something. Not yet, he said cryptically, but you will soon enough. The world around me began to fade, and I felt my body being pulled back into the timeline. When I opened my eyes again, everything was different. The timeline was intact, the paradox undone. And as I stood there, Taking in the quiet of a world that had been saved, I realized that, for better or worse, time had always been in our hands. With one final desperate motion, I reached the chrono key, and without thinking, I pressed the detonator Tobias had given me. The explosion was deafening. The room shook and time itself seemed to stutter, as though the universe was holding its breath. And then everything went black, but I had no choice. The keepers had already altered the timeline too much. They had pushed history to the brink of collapse. If we didn't act now, there might not be anything left to save, but the cost had been high. For a moment, there was only silence as I tried to catch my breath, still shaken by the close encounter. But something told me this was just the beginning. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just saving me. He had an agenda of his own, one that seemed to intersect with mine in ways I couldn't yet understand. And I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. He nodded slowly. Yes, the moment you found the chrono key, the moment you started investigating, you set off a chain reaction that the keepers never anticipated. You're not just a bystander in this. You're part of the solution. He shook his head, his eyes full of regret. Then you'll destroy everything, Ethan. You're walking straight into their hands, and I would never forget the price of the choice we made. I didn't respond. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at him, at the man who had been my ally, my friend, and now my enemy. I could see the fear in his eyes, the understanding that he had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore except stopping the keepers. I sat back in my seat, stunned. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my role in all of this, was a lie. I had been part of the timeline from the beginning, part of the very change I was trying to undo. You've made your choice, Keller, Tobias said, his eyes locking with mine. Now, we need to make sure the keepers don't have a chance to destroy everything. And now, it was just me. Alone, I had no choice but to finish what Dr. Ford had started. The future of the world, of time itself, rested on me finding the moment where the keepers had first altered history and stopping them before it was too late. I nodded, my mind resolute. It wasn't just a fight for time anymore, it was a fight for the future and for the world I once knew. We had to stop the keepers, and if it meant destroying everything in the process, so be it. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but I knew one thing. I wasn't backing down. As the days passed, I felt like I was diving deeper into a labyrinth with no clear exit. Every corner I turned seemed to lead to another layer of this mysterious world, but it was becoming increasingly clear that there were forces actively working to suppress the truth. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how dangerous this was, and how much I was in over my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had uncovered so far was just the tip of the iceberg. Despite the warnings, the dead ends, and the growing sense of danger around me, I couldn't stop myself from pushing forward. I had to know the full extent of what the consortium had done. I knew that this was bigger than just one conspiracy. It was about the very fabric of reality being manipulated at a global scale. But I was starting to fear that the more I learned, the harder it would be to stay sane. I had crossed the line, and the repercussions were becoming clearer by the hour. The message I had received earlier sent a cold chill through my spine. The consortium was not only aware of my investigation, they were actively tracking my every move. I had no choice but to keep going, to push deeper, but I could feel the walls closing in. I wasn't just looking for answers anymore. I was trying to survive. The car sped through the streets, the city blurring in the rearview mirror as we hurtled toward the unknown. We had barely escaped the grasp of the consortium, and yet I felt an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. We'd managed to infiltrate their systems. disrupt the frequencies, and trigger the shutdown, but that wasn't the end of it. The war we had started wasn't over. It had only just begun. The following days felt like we were living on borrowed time. The safe house, which had initially seemed like a refuge, quickly became a cage. We couldn't stay there long, not with the consortium closing in. Their reach was far too extensive, and it felt like every move we made was being tracked, every conversation overheard. The pressure of constantly looking over our shoulders was taking its toll, but I knew we couldn't stop now. Too much was at stake. The message echoed in my mind like a warning bell. "You're already too late." I stared at the screen. The words burned into my thoughts. Our moment of triumph, the hope that we had dismantled the consortium's control, was rapidly dissolving into something far more dangerous. The feeling of impending doom set in, colder and heavier than anything I had experienced before. The more I dug, the more it felt like I was walking on a tightrope. Every new discovery brought me closer to the truth, but also closer to the edge. Every step forward was matched by the mounting pressure from those who wanted me to stop. The consortium wasn't just watching anymore, they were hunting me. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep this rabbit hole went. I had barely scratched the surface, and yet the web of deception I was tangled in seemed to be growing more complex by the hour. The consortium's influence spread like a shadow over everything, and the more I looked, the more people I discovered had been involved in some capacity, either knowingly or unknowingly. The next few days felt like a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the frequencies I had stumbled upon. I kept replaying the data in my mind, but something was gnawing at me, something that didn't quite sit right. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands and dig deeper. I isolated the signal from the regular noise and set up a more detailed analysis. What I found next was nothing short of shocking. The night after Sarah's betrayal, I barely slept. I had lost everything. My apartment was in shambles, the evidence was gone, and I no longer knew who I could trust. But something inside me refused to give up. I couldn't let the consortium win, not after everything I had uncovered. They thought they had broken me, but in truth, they had only fueled the fire. The plan was simple, in theory. Infiltrate the consortium's transmission hubs, disrupt their frequencies, and cripple their control over the population. In practice, however, it felt anything but simple. The more Alex and I discussed the operation, the more the risks became clear. This wasn't just about hacking into some servers or cutting a few wires. It was about taking down an entire global operation, and with every step we took, the weight of the danger became more pressing. The sirens were getting louder, and the tension in the room escalated with each passing second. Ray's fingers flew over the keyboard, his face a picture of concentration as he worked to bypass every security measure the consortium had put in place. The upload bar slowly crept forward, inching closer to completion, but the reality of the situation was far from reassuring. We were running out of time. The consortium wasn't going to let this slip away. They were coming for us, and they were coming fast. 2 hours. It felt like an eternity as Alex and I waited for Ray to make his move. The weight of what we were about to do was crushing, but there was no turning back. I kept replaying Ray's words in my head. If we fail, it's over. If we didn't succeed in stopping the consortium now, their manipulation of the world would continue unchecked. We barely escaped the facility that night. Our hearts were still racing as we sped down the winding road away from the site. Alex was at the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, eyes scanning the rear-view mirror every few seconds. We both knew that, even if we managed to slip past the immediate danger, the real threat was just beginning. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary that day, just another routine check on the equipment. I'm Michael, a radio frequency engineer working for a small tech firm. And like most engineers, I spend my time calibrating and troubleshooting various radio systems. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work. However, today felt different. It all started with an odd flicker on the screen. A series of irregular static bursts. At first, I thought it was just a glitch in the system. But then I noticed something strange. The frequency pattern seemed almost purposeful, like it was designed to transmit more than just static. Alex and I spent hours discussing our next move, trying to figure out the best way to hit back, to deal the consortium a blow they couldn't recover from. But the more we talked, the more the realization set in. We were outmatched. The consortium controlled the media, the government, the military. They had vast resources at their disposal. We had only ourselves and the scraps of information we had gathered along the way. Almost there, Ray muttered, his voice tight with urgency. Just a few more seconds and it's done. As we drove, the tension in the car was palpable. Alex's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel with the kind of determination I'd seen before, but now tinged with desperation. I sat back in the seat, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened and what was coming next. I couldn't let that happen. I had learned a lot in the last few weeks. I had uncovered more about the structure of their operation, how they used frequencies not only to control public opinion, but to drive global events in their favor. They had engineered political coups, manipulated elections, even incited wars, all through the power of invisible sound waves. It was terrifying to realize just how much influence they wielded, and how long they had been doing it. I knew I had to act quickly. My first priority was to find another way to disrupt the frequencies, to sever the control they held over the world. But I was running out of options, and I had no idea where to start. The information I had gathered was gone, and the files I had compiled were either destroyed or erased. It wasn't just about the technology anymore. Sure, the frequencies were a tool, a weapon in their arsenal, but the true scope of the conspiracy became clearer as I began to follow the trail of documents, names, and covert projects linked to the Silent Sound Initiative. I was digging through old research papers and archived files when I stumbled upon something that made my heart stop. It wasn't just the data that was being concealed, it was the people behind it. The more I looked into the frequency patterns, the more I started to piece together the bigger picture. My breakthrough came when I stumbled upon a classified document that detailed a covert government project called Project Silent Sound. The project had been running for decades, and its goal was terrifying: to control human emotions and influence behavior through sound waves, transmitted at frequencies that were beyond the range of normal human perception. "Ray," I shouted into the phone, my voice shaking. "What's going on? We did it, right?" The breakthrough came one night, when I was sifting through a pile of old discarded technical manuals. Among the pages, one report caught my eye. It was buried under a heap of papers. Perhaps it had been left behind intentionally, perhaps not. But something about it felt significant. It was an internal memo from a company that had been supplying technology to the government for decades. The memo detailed the use of a specific type of equipment designed to transmit the exact frequencies I had been investigating. The consortium had eyes everywhere, and they wouldn't rest until they found us. Disrupting the frequency hub wasn't just an attack on their infrastructure, it was a direct challenge to their control over the world. They would come after us with everything they had, and we would need to move fast, think faster, and stay ahead of them at all costs. The first few days after my discovery were a blur of paranoia and determination. I had made copies of the files I'd found, and I'd reached out to the allies I'd gathered in the past few weeks. Some responded quickly, others hesitated, unsure of how much danger they'd be putting themselves in. But I was beyond hesitation. There was too much at stake. These frequencies weren't just static or random interference. They were embedded with specific patterns that resembled codes. The signals appeared to be purposefully constructed, almost like a message hidden in plain sight. I cross-referenced the frequencies with any government or private sector communications, but nothing came up. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with just a simple technical anomaly. This was something far bigger, and someone was actively concealing it. We had spent the last few days mapping out the transmission hubs, hidden satellite stations, remote towers, disguised as ordinary infrastructure, and underground facilities shielded from public view. Each one was linked to a massive network of broadcast stations that allowed the consortium to control everything from the media to global events. The idea was to disrupt these key points, sever the flow of the frequencies, and stop the manipulation. But there was a problem. The hubs were well guarded by more than just security. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something important. As I combed through the data, my instincts told me it was no random interference. It was like there was an invisible signal buried within the noise, something that didn't belong. My curiosity got the better of me, so I ran the signal through a deeper analysis. Alex had managed to access a few of the consortium's internal communication channels. What he found sent a chill down my spine. The network of transmitters was constantly shifting. The consortium didn't just rely on static, unchanging infrastructure. They were constantly moving the hubs, rerouting frequencies and adapting. It was as though they had built a system that was designed to be nearly impossible to defeat. Always changing, always evolving, and we were trying to break it. One hub at a time. Alex had one final contact left. A hacker. Someone deep inside the system who might be able to access the heart of the consortium's operations. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. At first I thought it was just another piece of the puzzle, but as I read on, the gravity of the information hit me. The equipment in question wasn't just for research or benign communication. It was designed to embed the frequencies into everyday consumer products. These weren't just experimental technologies locked away in secret labs. They were already being used on a massive scale, without the public ever realizing it. But it wasn't just a consortium that I had to worry about. There were people close to me, people I thought I could trust, who were beginning to show signs of being involved. My paranoia deepened as I realized that someone I had been confiding in might have been compromised. But then, as I sat alone in a dingy cafe trying to clear my mind, I remembered something. A contact. A hacker I had met during one of my early investigations. Someone who had helped me once before with some encrypted files. If anyone could help me get back on my feet, it was him. I glanced nervously toward the window. The faint sound of footsteps outside told me we didn't have long before the consortium's agents arrived. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Everything we had done, everything we had fought for, was hanging by a thread. This was the final chance to make the world see the truth. I spent hours poring over the data, looking for more clues. That's when I found the first real piece of the puzzle, a small encrypted file embedded in the signal. The encryption wasn't complex, but it was enough to discourage casual hackers. The file contained what seemed like raw psychological data, patterns of emotional responses linked to certain frequencies. The implications hit me hard. These frequencies were linked to controlling human emotions, possibly even behaviors. In one of my meetings with a former government contractor who had worked on early projects involving frequency manipulation, I learned something even more disturbing. The technology I had uncovered wasn't limited to just broadcasting sound. It was evolving. Newer iterations of the frequencies were being tested on more targeted groups, specific demographics and geographical locations. The consortium was honing their control, testing how far they could push the boundaries of human behavior and emotion. Ray's response was immediate. but strained. I triggered the shutdown. The frequencies are being disrupted, but they've already started activating their backup systems. This was expected. The consortium has contingencies. They're gonna come after us, hard. And there's no going back now. Ray's words kept echoing in my mind. They're coming for you. They won't stop until they've erased every trace. The document wasn't just about the frequencies themselves. It revealed something even darker. Silent sound was never meant to be a public project. It was designed for covert operations, to manipulate world leaders, entire populations, and the global flow of power itself. The project was born out of a desire to control, to shape public opinion on a massive scale. These frequencies were used in everything from political campaigns to economic policies, subtly influencing decisions without anyone realizing it. The documents weren't just about frequency manipulation. They revealed something far more insidious. Global influence campaigns that were tied directly to the manipulation of mass consciousness. The consortium wasn't just affecting individuals. They were steering entire nations, shaping elections, and controlling the very flow of information. They had been manipulating the media, feeding false narratives, pushing ideologies, all through the subtle use of sound frequencies that influenced the emotions of the masses. We had planned for this moment, but no amount of preparation could have fully prepared us for the reality of what was coming. The consortium had the power to make people disappear, erase their existence without a trace, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to do the same to us. We were holed up in a small apartment a few blocks away from the rendezvous point. Alex paced back and forth, his usual calm demeanor replaced by the same nervous energy that had been gnawing at me for hours. I tried to focus, reviewing the plan one last time, but the pressure was mounting. The results were baffling. These weren't just random waves. They were oddly structured, almost deliberate. The longer I looked at the frequencies, the more I began to feel like I had uncovered a secret. But what was it? And why had no one ever mentioned these peculiar frequencies before? I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. How could something so colossal be hidden from the world? But the deeper I looked, the more pieces fell into place. The engineers behind the project, the politicians who funded it, the corporations who had been using the technology for profit. It was all starting to make sense. I quickly fired off a message to him, hoping he hadn't disappeared into the shadows like everyone else I had known. His name was Alex, and he was a wizard when it came to breaking into systems. We had crossed paths when I was digging into an unrelated tech scandal a few years ago. He had offered me his help then, and now I was desperate enough to ask again. It was all happening without anyone knowing. The world was being subtly swayed, nudged in one direction or another, like a puppet on invisible strings. It was true. The consortium wasn't just going to let us get away with it. No matter what we had accomplished, no matter how big the blow we had dealt them, they were too powerful, too entrenched, and now they were aware of us, of our existence. They had every resource at their disposal to hunt us down and eliminate us. My heart pounded as I processed his words. The backup systems, of course. The consortium wasn't just going to let us undo years of manipulation without a fight. They had prepared for this. They had prepared for everything. My heart raced as I realized what this could mean. If these frequencies were being broadcast on a mass scale, they could influence people's moods, their thoughts, even their actions. A government or corporation could use this technology to manipulate entire populations without them even knowing it. It wasn't just some experimental technology. It was a weapon, silent, invisible, but powerful. The air felt thick, heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I knew this moment would define everything. The risks, the stakes, the consequences. This was our last shot at taking down the consortium and ending the silent control they had exerted over humanity for so long. If we failed, it wouldn't just be our lives on the line. It would be the lives of millions of people around the world. The first sign came when an old friend, Sarah, whom I had known for years, showed up unexpectedly at my apartment. She was an investigative journalist, and we'd worked together on several projects in the past. At first, I was relieved to see her. Her calm presence was a welcome change from the constant anxiety gnawing at me. But as we talked, I noticed something was off. Her questions were too probing, too specific. She was asking about things I had only shared with my closest allies. It was like she already knew what I was researching. The first target was a facility in the outskirts of a small town. It seemed like the perfect place to start. Remote, relatively low security, and close enough to our location for us to make a quick getaway. The only problem was that we didn't have the luxury of time. The consortium was already aware that someone was trying to expose their operation. We didn't know how, but they had clearly been tracking our every move. The project had been split into multiple phases. The first phase involved using the frequencies to influence public sentiment, shifting opinions on politics, economics, and social issues. The second phase was far darker. It was about using the frequencies to create emotional responses, influencing people's decisions on a subconscious level, nudging them towards specific actions. This phase wasn't just about changing minds. It was about controlling them. The report mentioned that the frequencies were now being embedded into everything from mobile phones and radios to TV broadcasts and even advertisements. The goal was subtle: to influence the emotions and behaviors of people, to nudge society in a certain direction without anyone ever knowing why they felt the way they did. It was an elegant form of mind control, silent, invisible, and undeniably effective. The more I read, the more I realized just how pervasive it had become. These frequencies were everywhere. The upload bar reached 90%. I held my breath, praying that it would finish before we were discovered. The screen flickered, and I could see Ray's hands trembling slightly. But he didn't stop. He was pushing through the final barriers, determined to finish what we had started. "This is it," Alex said, his eyes grim as he paced back and forth. "If we can get access to their central command, the source of the frequencies, we can shut everything down. But it's not going to be easy. This guy, Ray, he's our last chance. He's got the skills to bypass their firewalls and deep security. If anyone can get us to the core, it's him." We hadn't spoken much since the getaway. Both of us were trying to process the chaos of what had just happened. The sudden silence between us spoke volumes. Alex was the first to break it, glancing at me for a brief moment before turning back to the road. That evening I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had always believed that radio frequencies were harmless, just background noise for the most part, but this felt different. Something deeper, something intentional. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I had to know more. I had to dig deeper. But little did I know, my search was going to lead me into a rabbit hole that I could never escape from. "Are you sure this is the right place?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I crouched behind a rusted metal container, peering at the facility from a distance. "Are you sure you're safe, Michael?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with concern. But the way she said it didn't feel like genuine concern. It felt rehearsed, calculated, but then the chilling reality set in. The most horrifying part wasn't just the technology. It was the fact that I had been broadcasting these frequencies too. I'd worked on countless projects in the past, and some of the very devices I had been a part of had been used to transmit these hidden signals. But there was one thing I hadn't accounted for: the organization that controlled everything. The Silent Sound Project wasn't just some rogue government initiative. It was backed by a powerful, shadowy group that spanned across governments, multinational corporations, and influential institutions. It wasn't just a conspiracy theory, it was real. And I was beginning to realize that I wasn't just a spectator anymore, I was a target. "Do you think they've traced us already?" he asked, his voice tense but controlled. Finally, the time arrived. Alex grabbed the burner phone, checking it one last time for the message from Ray. It was a simple instruction. We move now. No further details. No extra warnings. We knew what needed to be done. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Governments, multinational corporations, and even entire social movements had been engineered through the use of these frequencies. The truth was more disturbing than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about power for the sake of power, it was about total control. The consortium didn't just want to influence the present, they wanted to shape the future. They had been controlling history from behind the scenes for decades. And now, it was clear to me, they had no intention of stopping. I couldn't ignore the gravity of what I was learning. What had started as a technical anomaly had become something far more sinister. The consortium was no longer just influencing individual behaviors. They were reshaping entire societies. They had the ability to control the narrative, to manipulate political elections, even to steer the future of nations. The very fabric of reality was being woven in a way that no one could see, but everyone could feel. I nodded, though a wave of unease washed over me. I knew we were walking into a trap. The consortium wouldn't let us get this close to their heart without retaliating. But there was no turning back now. If we didn't act, the manipulation would continue, and more lives would be affected. I tried to brush off the panic rising in my chest. Maybe I was overreacting, I told myself. After all, I was just a small-town engineer with no real ties to anything that big. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear. I had to follow this thread. If these frequencies were being used for something as sinister as mind control, I couldn't just ignore it. I turned to Alex, who was frantically scanning the building's control room. "What's happening?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Suddenly, the door to the apartment burst open, and a group of black-clad agents rushed in. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the familiar uniforms. The consortium had found us. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. "Where are we going?" I asked, breaking the silence. I started pulling records from past projects, anything related to frequencies. I thought maybe there was a simple explanation, that perhaps it was some new technology I hadn't been briefed on. But the more I read, the more questions I had. No one seemed to know anything about these particular signals, which only made me more suspicious. The engineers I asked about it seemed oddly evasive, like they were hiding something. I needed answers, and I knew I wasn't going to get them by sticking to the usual channels. Alex glanced at me, his face a mask of focus. "We need to go underground. We've got people who can help us. We need to lay low and find a way to get the truth out. If we don't expose everything we've uncovered, it won't matter what we've done. The world needs to know what's really happening." Alex looked at me, his face grim but resolute. "It's now or never." Alex, who had been the one doing the legwork, nodded. "This is it. I've traced the signal to this point. If we disrupt this station, we'll hit them hard." As I pieced together the puzzle, I found more and more evidence that tied the frequencies to significant global events. I saw correlations between shifts in public opinion and the introduction of new frequency transmission methods, elections, protests, economic crises. All of these events seemed to align with the deployment of these frequencies. The consortium wasn't just a group of powerful individuals pulling strings behind the scenes. They were directing the course of history. But where was the proof? Sure, I had found documents and I had connected the dots, but the real evidence, the tangible proof that I could use to expose them, was still out of reach. I needed something bigger, something irrefutable. So I kept digging. "Get down!" Alex shouted, pulling me to the floor just as a barrage of gunfire rang out, shattering the windows. I rolled behind the couch, heart pounding in my chest. The agents were fast, efficient, and determined. They knew exactly what we were doing, and they were here to stop it. "I know you're in deep, Michael. I've been following your work. Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. I've got something you need." I pushed her away, making some excuse about needing to focus on my work, but inside a knot tightened in my stomach. I had trusted Sarah. She was one of the few people I thought could help me navigate the storm I was in. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that she might be a part of it. She had known too much about my investigation for it to be a coincidence. I thought about it for a second. The way things had unfolded at the facility, the guards' reaction, how quickly they seemed to mobilize. It was clear that they had anticipated some sort of breach. "It's possible," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to assume that they know exactly where we are by now." I'd never heard of the group before, but as I traced back the origins of the project, I uncovered a name: the Consortium. It was an elusive network of elites who had used their influence to shape history from behind the scenes. They had their hands in everything: global politics, the media, finance, and now they had their fingers on the pulse of society's emotions. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had unknowingly become part of the very system I was now trying to dismantle. The thought of it was paralyzing. My entire career, everything I had worked for, had been part of the conspiracy. I had been an unwitting accomplice in the very manipulation I had been trying to expose. And worse, I had no idea how long this had been going on, or how far-reaching its impact was. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The encrypted file led me to more data, much of it incomplete or corrupted as though someone had tried to scrub it clean. It wasn't just the frequencies themselves that were being hidden, but the people behind them. Someone had invested a great deal of effort to keep this under wraps. We had no idea where Ray was, but Alex had arranged a meeting with him through an encrypted channel. Our plan was to meet him in a secluded part of the city, away from prying eyes. The risks were enormous. If the consortium had even a hint of where we were, we'd be done for. But we couldn't afford to hesitate. We've triggered the virus, but they're locking down all the access points. They've got internal firewalls set up to keep us from fully taking control, and they've already started routing a counterattack. They're coming for us. There was no going back now. I had already crossed a line, even if I didn't fully understand what that line was. I thought to myself, maybe I'm just overthinking this. But what if I'm not? What if I've stumbled upon something bigger than I could possibly imagine? Alex's knuckles tightened on the wheel. Then we're already being tracked. We've got to disappear fast, but there was no time to waste. I had to act quickly. I knew the consequences of my discovery. The consortium wouldn't just let me walk away with this information. They would silence me, just like they had done with anyone else who had tried to expose their secrets. But I had to take the risk. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about stopping a dangerous force that had already influenced millions, maybe billions of people. But what really shook me was the realization that the frequencies weren't just used on the masses. They were being tested on individuals. Some of the documents I found detailed experiments where specific people were exposed to these frequencies to alter their emotional responses. It was like playing God. The consortium wasn't just manipulating opinions, they were altering human behavior at the most fundamental level. I couldn't shake the sense of impending danger. There were no clear signs of surveillance, no cameras visible, no obvious security guards. But we both knew that wasn't the whole story. The consortium had eyes everywhere, even if they were hidden. And the moment we made our move, we would be on their radar. I couldn't stop now. But as the days passed, I started to notice something strange. My own equipment was picking up more signals, more disturbances. It felt like I was being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind this knew I was onto them. It wasn't just paranoia, it was instinct. Something was closing in on me, and it was coming from all sides. I nodded. Let's do this. I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. We had exposed the consortium's grip on society. We had sabotaged their mind control frequencies. But none of that mattered unless we could make the truth public, unless we could expose their manipulative control over the masses. But how could we do that? When they were hunting us like prey, it was like being trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The tension in the room was unbearable. We had gone all in. We had disrupted the frequency hubs, triggered the shutdown, and exposed the heart of the consortium's operations. But now, they were closing in, and the chances of us surviving this were slim. The consortium wasn't just going to stand by and let their empire crumble. It was the break I had been waiting for. I quickly gathered my things and made my way to the warehouse, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what Alex had for me, but it had to be good. Anything was better than staying in the dark. My blood ran cold as I pieced together the extent of their reach. The consortium had been controlling the masses for decades, subtly shifting public perception and molding social norms through the frequencies they transmitted. They weren't just controlling minds, they were controlling the very course of history. "Ray!" I shouted over the chaos. "Is it done?" That night as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I went over everything in my head. The files, the messages, the cryptic warnings. But one question kept haunting me. How far did the consortium's influence go? Could I trust anyone? Had I already been compromised? The day of the meeting arrived and Alex and I made our way to the rendezvous point. We took every precaution, switching cars, using burner phones, and constantly changing our route. The tension was suffocating, but there was a sense of resolve that had settled in between us. We had to keep going no matter what. We had no other choice. The more I searched, the more obstacles I encountered. Files would disappear from my computer without explanation. I would find myself locked out of encrypted databases for reasons that made no sense. It was as though I was being watched at every turn, and every time I got too close to the truth, something or someone was there to stop me. I knew I had to go further. I couldn't shake the feeling that the odd frequencies weren't random at all. They were there for a reason, and I had a bad feeling that uncovering the truth would be far more dangerous than I could ever prepare for. Alex moved toward the exit, his face determined. "We need to leave, now. The longer we stay here, the easier it will be for them to track us." I nodded. My mind raced with possibilities. The consortium had access to global tracking systems, advanced surveillance technologies, and intelligence networks that made it nearly impossible to escape their gaze. But we weren't completely helpless. We had some advantages. Small ones, but advantages nonetheless. Alex had contacts, people who could help us stay under the radar. If we could make it to the safe house he had set up, we might have a chance to regroup, rethink, and plan our next move. I reached out to a few old colleagues who had worked in the field of psychological warfare and covert operations, but when I brought up the frequencies, their responses were dismissive, almost as if they knew exactly what I was talking about, but refused to engage. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one who had stumbled upon this. Others had known about it for years, but they were too afraid to speak out. I realized I couldn't just expose this. It wasn't enough to bring the truth to light. The consortium was too powerful, too entrenched in every system. Exposing them could mean my end, and I wasn't alone. There were others like me who had tried and failed to uncover this truth. They had either disappeared or been silenced in ways that were too perfect to be coincidences. I started drafting a report. I knew that I couldn't just go public with this. It would be too dangerous for me and for anyone else who tried to help me. But I had to document everything. I had to make sure that if something happened to me, the information would be out there. It was a slow process, but I began to build a network of people who could help. Some were whistleblowers, former employees of the government and corporations that had worked on the Silent Sound project and its offshoots. Others were independent researchers who had been investigating similar phenomena, but like me, they hadn't yet connected all the dots. Together, we formed a loose but growing alliance, united by one goal: to uncover the truth and stop the manipulation before it went any further. It wasn't just the two of us anymore. The fight we were in was bigger than just surviving. It was about making sure the truth couldn't be buried again, no matter how powerful the forces trying to keep it hidden were. "Let's do this," I said, standing up and adjusting the small pack of equipment I'd slung over my shoulder. We had everything we needed to take down the hub, a device that would scramble the frequencies, a few well-placed explosives to disable the facility's power source, and a backup plan in case things went south. Our mission was simple: get in, disrupt the transmission, and get out, fast. Ray didn't look up. His face was a mask of focus, his fingers still flying over the keyboard. "Almost," he grunted. "I'm not stopping until it's finished." The deeper I went, the more I discovered about the sheer scope of the project. There were satellite networks, hidden installations, and even private organizations all involved in spreading and refining the frequencies. It was everywhere, and yet no one had a clue. The meeting spot was a quiet, deserted cafe on the edge of the city. We arrived early, scanning the area for anything suspicious. Every passerby felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed to conceal an agent of the consortium. But after what felt like an eternity, Ray arrived. He was a tall, lanky man in his early 30s, wearing a plain jacket and dark sunglasses, blending in with the crowd. The next day I tried to contact the few remaining allies I had in my corner. I needed help to disrupt the transmission of the frequencies, to take down the operation once and for all. But when I checked my email, there was a message waiting for me. The subject line read, "You're being watched. Stop now." We moved quickly, slipping out of the apartment and blending into the shadows of the quiet city streets. The night was eerily still, as if even the city was holding its breath. We knew the consortium was already aware of our movements. We'd gone too far. The only question now was how much of a fight they would put up. When I arrived, the warehouse was eerily quiet. The only light came from a flickering overhead bulb. Alex was waiting for me, sitting at a workbench surrounded by computers and cables. He looked like he had barely slept in days, his eyes bloodshot and tired. Alex made eye contact with him and gave a subtle nod. Ray approached us cautiously, his gaze flicking around the street before he sat down at the table. He didn't waste time. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my closest colleagues. Everyone had been too silent for too long, and now I was paying the price for asking the wrong questions. Still, I couldn't back down. This was bigger than my job, bigger than any single company. This was about the future of humanity, and I was the only one who seemed to care. I decided to reach out to a few trusted allies, people I had met through my investigation. If I was going to stop this, I couldn't do it alone. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I didn't act now, it would be too late. The manipulation was already happening, and time was running out. I felt trapped. There were people I trusted, colleagues, friends. But now I wasn't so sure. Had they always known about this? Were they complicit? Or was I the only one left who hadn't been manipulated by the same forces? I hesitated, the weight of our mission's success hanging in the balance. We had done it. We'd actually done it. The frequencies were breaking down. and the control they had over people's minds was slipping away. But I knew the risks. I had seen the message. The consortium wasn't just going to let this go. It was from an anonymous source, but the tone was unmistakable. They knew I was on the brink of uncovering the full extent of their operations, and they wanted me to back off. The pressure was becoming unbearable. My investigation was starting to feel like a race against time. Every document I uncovered, every piece of data I found led me deeper into the web. But with each revelation, the danger I faced escalated. The consortium wasn't just interested in covering up their project. They were actively hunting anyone who got too close. They had the means, the resources, and the power to erase anyone who threatened to expose their operation. Still, the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. It wasn't just a matter of uncovering hidden files or exposing the corrupt practices of powerful individuals. The consortium had eyes everywhere. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my closest allies, because I had no idea who might be working for them. There were leaks in the system, people who had been planted into our ranks to feed false information, to mislead us. The agents were getting closer. The apartment was small, and the walls offered little protection. We couldn't afford to be caught, not now. Everything we had done would be for nothing if we were captured. I pulled out the small device Ray had given me earlier, a signal jammer, and activated it. The agent's radio started buzzing with static, throwing their communication systems into disarray. It wasn't much, but it bought us a few precious seconds. The rendezvous point was an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a perfect place to lay low and conduct the final operation. The building was dark, silent, and almost too quiet. When we arrived, Ray was already there, sitting in the corner, his laptop open in front of him. His face was illuminated only by the pale glow of the screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he worked quickly and efficiently. We moved quietly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the well-lit paths. The facility was surrounded by a high fence, but it wasn't much of an obstacle for someone like Alex. Within minutes, we were inside, crouched behind some equipment, watching the main control building. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was no time for hesitation. This had to work. We reached the hideout. A small, nondescript apartment tucked away in a quiet part of the city. It was far enough off the radar that we could lay low for a while, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the consortium caught up with us. They had eyes everywhere. The apartment wasn't much, just a room with a couple of chairs, a small kitchen and a few outdated computers, but it was secure for now. "Where's the safe house?" I asked, trying to steady my thoughts. "You look like hell," I said, trying to lighten the mood, but he only nodded grimly in response. Alex didn't look at me this time, his eyes fixed on the road. "A few hours away. It's hidden, but we can't afford to stop for anything. If we get caught on the way, we're done." As I sat in my office, staring at the document that could change everything, I knew I had to make a choice. I could continue digging, but I wasn't naive enough to think that I could do this alone. I needed allies, people who could help me expose the truth, and people who could protect me. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. The consortium would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. As we approached the main building, Alex pulled out a small device from his pack, a signal jammer designed to temporarily disrupt the facility's communications. He activated it, and immediately the lights inside the building flickered, as if the power had been momentarily cut off. That was our signal. We had mere seconds before the facility would go into lockdown. At that moment, I made a decision. I was going to follow this to the end, no matter where it led. It was a dangerous path, I knew that now, but I couldn't walk away from it. I wasn't just an engineer anymore. I was a man on the brink of uncovering a secret that could shake the foundations of the world as we knew it. But as I prepared to send the information to those I trusted, the feeling of being watched intensified. My phone buzzed with a new message. The text was brief, but it chilled me to the bone. You're getting too close. Stop now, or there will be consequences. I began to notice strange things happening around me. People I didn't recognize started showing up at my apartment building. I had a feeling they were following me. My phone would occasionally glitch, as if someone were trying to listen in. It was becoming clear that the consortium had eyes everywhere. They knew what I was doing, and they weren't going to let me get away with it. I know who you are, and I know what you're trying to do, he said in a low voice. I'm in, but you should know. You're in way over your heads. The consortium isn't going to let you walk away from this. I reached for my gun, my grip tight as I moved to the edge of the room, peering out to see where the agents were. They were closing in, but Ray was still working, oblivious to the danger. The upload bar was now at 95%. The final moments were upon us. I've been tracking their signals for a while, Alex said, motioning for me to sit down. I've been watching, waiting for you to figure it out. You're not the only one who's been looking into this. One night, after a particularly late session of combing through old files, I received an encrypted message from a contact I'd been trying to meet in person. The message was brief but chilling. They know you're close. You need to stop now or they will come for you. You're already on their radar. Don't trust anyone. Ray was already there, huddled over a laptop, typing furiously. His face was lit by the pale glow of the screen, and I could see the stress on his features. He looked up when we entered, his eyes tired but determined. That night, the unthinkable happened. I returned home to find my apartment ransacked. Every file, every document, every piece of evidence I had collected was gone. The room was a mess, drawers pulled open, papers scattered across the floor. But what really shook me was the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned to leave, but just as I reached the door, I heard a faint noise from behind me. We can't just leave it like this, I said, pacing in frustration. We've triggered the shutdown, we've exposed them. We need to make sure the world knows the truth before they wipe us out. You ready? Alex asked, stepping forward. A figure stood in the doorway. It was Sarah. Alex stopped and turned to face me, his expression hardening. Do you think they'll let you walk away with the truth? They'll hunt us down. They'll wipe every trace of this operation from existence. I exchanged a look with Alex. It wasn't exactly reassuring, but I understood the reality of the situation. Ray wasn't here to hold our hands. He was here to help us take down the machine. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. I could feel the pressure building around me. The consortium was closing in. They knew I was onto them, and they weren't going to let me get away with this. But there was no turning back now. I had to keep going. For the first time since I began this investigation, I realized the truth was even more dangerous than I had imagined. And now I was its target. Just a little more, Ray muttered to himself. His voice was strained, but there was no turning back now. My heart skipped a beat. You knew. My investigation had officially crossed the point of no return. I was in this for the long haul, but I wasn't sure if I would make it out alive. My pulse quickened. I suspected I was being watched, but to have it confirmed was a new level of terror. I immediately shut down my computer and pulled the plug on all the data I had been collecting. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. I couldn't undo what I had uncovered. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no way out now. I had crossed a line, and the forces I was up against were too powerful to stop. Now! Alex hissed, and we both darted toward the control room. The plan was to plant the device and overload the frequency broadcast system, rendering it useless. But the closer we got, the more the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something didn't feel right. One night, as I was going through some old lab notes, I received another message. This one wasn't a warning. It was a threat. You've crossed the line, Michael. We have the power to stop you. If you continue, you'll regret it. Ray didn't look up, but his voice was calm, as ready as I'll ever be. I've initiated the first part of the virus, but we're going to need a distraction to keep them from locking us out. The frequency disruptions need to happen now or we'll lose the signal. You've got about 20 minutes before they realize what we're doing and trigger the lockdown. The tension was palpable as we sped through the night, the car's engine the only sound between us. It felt like we were running from something much bigger than just the consortium. It felt like we were running from an entire world that had already been shaped by their invisible hands. We had no idea who we could trust anymore, who was an ally or who had already been compromised. "You made it," he said, almost as if surprised. "I didn't expect you both to get out unscathed." Alex and I exchanged a quick glance. We knew what had to be done. The distraction, the diversion. It wasn't going to be easy and it wasn't going to be without risks, but we had no choice. Alex nodded. "Not everything, but enough. I've had my suspicions about the frequencies for a long time. It wasn't hard to see the patterns once I started looking. The consortium? I don't know much about them, but I know they're everywhere, and they're not going to stop until they control everything." But I couldn't stop either. Not now, not after seeing what was at stake. So I pressed on, knowing that the deeper I dug, the more danger I would face, but it was too late for hesitation. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. "Cover him," Alex shouted. "I'll keep them off you." I knew then that I had to act fast. The walls were closing in. I couldn't keep running, and I couldn't keep hiding. The information I had uncovered was far too dangerous to keep to myself, but I also knew that exposing it would be a death sentence. I had to find a way to expose the truth, to destroy the system before it destroyed me. I took a deep breath. He was right. We couldn't afford to be sentimental now. The priority was survival, getting out. We had exposed the consortium's control system. That was something. No matter what happened next, the truth was out there. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice cold, almost mocking. My heart skipped a beat. I had been so focused on the consortium that I hadn't considered the possibility that someone close to me was part of it all along. The hours stretched on in silence, the only break in the monotony being the occasional glance in the rearview mirror. We didn't speak again until we finally reached the outskirts of the city. Alex pulled off the main road, turning onto a small hidden dirt path that led into a dense forest. We parked the car, the engine now silent, and the night around us felt unnervingly quiet. "We did," Alex replied, his voice steady. "But we need to move fast. The consortium knows we're still alive. They're coming for us. What's the plan?" Alex asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. When we reached the control room, we were met with an eerie silence. The guards weren't anywhere in sight. I should have known it was too easy. "All right," I said, trying to steady my voice. "We move." Now, I had one option left. I had to take down the frequencies themselves. If I could find a way to disrupt the transmission, to sever the flow of control, it could unravel everything. But that meant confronting the consortium head-on, and I wasn't sure I could survive the consequences. I leaned in, eager for more information. "What can we do? How do we stop this?" I nodded, taking a deep breath as I aimed my weapon at the approaching agents. The stakes were higher than ever. We couldn't afford to miss a single shot. Every second mattered. I fired first, hitting one of the agents in the leg and sending him stumbling backward. The others paused for a moment, but quickly recovered, returning fire. I ducked, narrowly avoiding a bullet as it whizzed past my head. I stood frozen, unable to speak. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah wasn't just a journalist. She was an agent of the consortium. Everything she had done, every conversation we had shared had been a lie. She had been watching me the entire time. "Let's move," I said, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Ray leaned forward. I've been following their network for months. I know how they've been rerouting their frequencies, covering their tracks. But it's all connected, every satellite, every transmission tower. They've built a system that adapts to everything we throw at it. But there's one thing they didn't account for, a system-wide shutdown, Ray nodded. I've been tracking their movements. They're already sending agents to secure all the data we've accessed. The shutdown is temporary. If they can restore the frequencies, they'll resume full control. We need to get this information out to the world before they can close the gap. Something's off, I whispered to Alex. We'll have to walk the rest of the way, Alex said, stepping out of the car and pulling a heavy duffel bag from the trunk. The last thing we need is to be tracked by a car's GPS. Follow my lead, Alex paused, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. We can't just disrupt the frequencies, Michael. We need to get to their source. I've been able to trace the signals back to a few key locations. They're using satellites and hidden transmission towers to broadcast this stuff. If we can take out the transmission hubs, we can cut off their control. But we'll have to move fast. They've got the resources to cover their tracks, and they'll be onto us the minute we make a move. Before he could respond, the door behind us slammed shut, and a dozen armed guards poured into the room, their guns aimed at us. My heart skipped a beat. They'd known. Somehow they had known we were coming. I felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. A system-wide shutdown? Could it really be that simple? I felt the weight of his words settle on my chest. It was too much. We had triggered the shutdown, but the battle wasn't won yet. The consortium had everything they needed to keep manipulating the masses. If we didn't get the truth out, it would all be for nothing. Ray was still focused, completely absorbed in his task. The upload was almost finished. The screen read 98%, then 99%. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. We were so close. She took a step forward, a look of quiet triumph on her face. You didn't really think you could stop this, did you? We knew about you long before you started looking into the frequencies. Still, I had no choice. The storm was gathering and there was no turning back now. The forest was thick with trees, their branches twisting overhead like dark arms reaching for the sky. We moved quickly but cautiously, our steps muffled by the soft earth beneath us. The cold night air hung heavy, making every sound feel like it was being amplified. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The entire world felt like it was watching us. We ran through the back hallways, away from the control room and toward the exit. The facility was starting to shake with the force of the alarms, blaring louder and louder. The backup systems were kicking in, locking doors, activating security measures. It was as if the building itself was rejecting us, fighting to keep its secrets safe. We split up, with Alex heading towards the control center where we would trigger the diversion. The idea was simple: create a situation that would force the consortium to focus on something immediate, something that would buy Ray the time he needed to access their core system and trigger the shutdown. But we had no choice. We had to keep moving. Every second we stayed there brought us closer to being caught. Drop the devices, one of the guards barked, his voice cold and commanding. You're done. How do we expose them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How do we make sure this never happens again? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the break I needed. But even with Alex's help, the task ahead seemed insurmountable. The consortium was everywhere, and they controlled everything from the media to the government. If we were going to take them down, it would take everything we had. I made my way to the building's rooftop, the wind biting at my skin as I climbed the stairs to the top. From here, I could see the city sprawling out before me, lights twinkling in the distance. It felt surreal. Everything I had fought for, everything that had brought me to this moment, was about to unfold. Ray continued. I've been working on a way to deploy a virus. something that will infiltrate their network and trigger a global shutdown. But we don't have much time. Once they realize we're coming for them, they'll go into lockdown mode and all our progress will be wiped out. Right now, I shouted. The weight of her words sunk in. I had been played. The consortium had known about me from the start and they had used Sarah to keep tabs on me. Every step of my investigation, every lead I followed had been watched, guided and twisted to keep me on track, but never too close to the truth. We walked for what seemed like hours, the darkness wrapping around us as we made our way deeper into the woods. Finally, Alex stopped, signaling me to be quiet. He crouched down, pointing to a small cabin that was partially hidden by thick bushes and overgrown trees. As we reached the exit, I saw the first of the consortium's agents coming into view. Black-clad figures moving swiftly through the shadows, their weapons raised. It was a moment of sheer terror. I had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. We were on the run now, hunted by a force far larger than ourselves. How long do we have? I asked, my heart beating faster. I froze for a moment, weighing my options. There was no way out. We were trapped, and the frequency disruptor was still in my hand. It was my only chance. I pulled out the small device Ray had given me, a signal jammer designed to disrupt their surveillance systems. If I could activate it from the rooftop, I might be able to blind their security cameras, forcing them to reroute their attention. I had only one shot at this. If it didn't work, they would catch on to Ray's plan instantly, and we would lose. Ray stood up, locking eyes with both of us. We need to leak the data. All of it. The files, the recordings, the evidence of what they've been doing to the world. It's all here. He gestured to his laptop. We can't just broadcast it publicly. We need to be strategic. If we do it wrong, they'll discredit everything we've worked for. Ray's fingers flew across the keyboard one last time. The upload bar hit 100%. The screen flashed bright green, signaling that the data had been successfully sent. I couldn't believe it. It was done. We had exposed the truth. This is it, he whispered. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice shaky but defiant. She smirked, stepping further into the room. You said you've been tracking their signals. How much time do we have? I asked, already dreading the answer. Alex and I exchanged a look. This was the moment, the last chance to make the world see the truth. But the weight of what we were about to do was overwhelming. We were up against a force with infinite resources. The consortium wouldn't let us expose them without a fight, and they would come after us, trying to erase everything we had done. Alex looked at the monitors in front of him, his face tense. We've got a window, a small one. If we don't act within the next 72 hours, they'll move the satellites and change the frequencies. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to get to them, but the moment of victory was short-lived. The agents were closing in, and we were out of time. I grabbed Alex's arm, pulling him away from the front line of fire. Don't listen to him, Alex muttered, his voice barely audible as he reached for his own hidden weapon. But I knew it was too late. We were surrounded, and even if we fought back, we couldn't win this fight. Go! Alex shouted, pushing me toward the door. Out, now! Just stop, she said softly. You can't win this. No one can. Not long. They've already started tracking me. I need you to create a diversion, get their attention, buy me enough time to get into their core system. I've got one shot at this. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the button. We approached cautiously, checking our surroundings for any signs of movement. Once we were inside, Alex locked the door behind us, and the small room felt like a safe haven, though it was far from the sanctuary I had imagined. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, and the only light came from a single lamp in the corner. But it was secure, and right now, that was all that mattered. I felt my stomach drop as I realized she was right. I had underestimated the depth of the consortium's control. They had agents everywhere, pulling strings behind the scenes. There was no one left I could trust, no one to help me. But I couldn't give up, not now. Not after everything I had uncovered. I felt the weight of his words sink in. A diversion? That meant one thing. We were about to make our final move, and it would be a dangerous one. The consortium wouldn't just let us walk away after this. But if we didn't take this chance, we might as well be handing them the world. I had done it. The first part of the plan was in motion. The diversion was working. I took a deep breath. Then we don't have a choice. We need to act now. Then we do it, I said, my voice resolute. We leak it. We make sure everyone knows what's really happening. We bolted through the emergency exit onto the streets below. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it didn't matter. We had no time to breathe. We had no time to think. We ran, weaving through alleyways, using the chaos around us to mask our escape. Every few steps, I'd glance behind me, half expecting to see a group of agents closing in. But for now, we managed to stay one step ahead. We can rest here for a bit, Alex said, setting the duffel bag down on the table. But we need to get in contact with some people. I've got a few ways to cover our tracks, but we need to keep moving. They won't stop until we're both out of the picture. We have to go now, I yelled. With a quick motion, I activated the disruptor and pressed it against the control panel, sending a pulse of interference through the system. The lights flickered again, and the room's monitors blinked out of existence. The sound of the frequencies that had been echoing through my head for months suddenly ceased. I grabbed my phone and sent Alex a quick message. It's working. You've got your window. I nodded, determined. We'll do whatever it takes. I sat down on the hard chair by the table, trying to breathe through the panic rising in my chest. How long do we have before they find us? I'll stop when I expose the truth, I said, my voice gaining strength. Even if it costs me my life. Over the next few days, Alex and I worked tirelessly. We mapped out the locations of the transmission hubs, gathering as much data as we could without drawing attention. But the more we discovered, the more I realized how far-reaching the consortium's network really was. They had eyes everywhere. Security cameras, satellites, digital surveillance. It was as though they were always one step ahead. Ray nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he began to upload the files. Every second felt like an eternity, but we had no choice. The world needed to know, and this was the only way to make sure it didn't all slip back into the shadows. Ray stood up, his face pale but determined. I've done it. It's out there. The world will know. The guards froze, confused, and I saw my opening. Run! I shouted to Alex, and we bolted for the exit. We ducked into a narrow side street, where Alex had arranged for a getaway vehicle to be waiting. We were seconds away from freedom, but the terror of being so close to capture gnawed at me. We had triggered the shutdown, we had exposed them, but the consortium wasn't finished with us. Not by a long shot. Alex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward a small radio on the counter and started adjusting the dial. The static buzzed in the air, but then it cleared, and a voice crackled through. As the files transferred, a sense of urgency filled the room. It wasn't enough to expose them. We had to make sure the world would listen. We had to make sure this wasn't just another piece of forgotten history. But as Ray's fingers clicked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. As we prepared for our mission, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was our last chance. If we succeeded, we might be able to stop the manipulation once and for all. But if we failed, I didn't even want to think about the consequences. As we reached the car, Alex slammed the door open. "Get in," he ordered. Ray looked at us for a moment as if weighing our resolve. Then he stood up. "Meet me in 2 hours. I'll have everything ready. But remember, if we fail, it's over. The frequencies will be unstoppable, and there won't be a chance to fix it." She shook her head, the smirk fading. "You'll never get the chance." The response came almost immediately. "I'm in. Keep it up." We didn't get far. The entire facility seemed to be coming alive, alarms blaring as the backup power kicked in. We were seconds away from being caught, but I didn't look back. I knew we had to get out, and we had to do it fast. The success of our mission meant nothing if we didn't survive. We didn't have time to savor the victory. The agents were right behind us. I grabbed the duffel bag with the remaining gear and ushered Ray toward the back exit. We ran through the building's emergency stairs, hearing the agents' footsteps behind us, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. "Alex, you there?" the voice asked, and with that she turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my apartment. I had lost everything: the evidence, my sense of security, and the only person I thought I could rely on. But I had also gained something I couldn't ignore: a burning resolve. Suddenly, the screen flashed red. The next few minutes felt like hours. I watched from the rooftop as the consortium security forces scrambled, their focus diverted. They were reacting to the disturbance, sending personnel to assess the situation. It was exactly what we needed. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized how close we were to achieving our goal. The pressure was mounting. The consortium was closing in, and I knew that our every move was being watched. But with Alex by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we might actually have a shot at taking down the system. We burst out into the alley behind the building, gasping for air. The city was a blur around us, lights flashing and people running for cover as we sprinted into the night. We had done it. We had exposed the consortium, but the cost was high. We piled into the back seat, the engine roaring to life as we sped away. The car raced through the streets, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, that we had only just begun to scratch the surface of the war we had started. We ran through the facility, dodging guards and narrowly avoiding capture, but as we made it to the exit, we heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Reinforcements were coming. Our window of escape was closing fast. With that, Ray disappeared into the crowd, leaving us to prepare for the most dangerous mission of our lives. I didn't know if we'd make it out alive, but I knew one thing for certain. This was the only chance we had to stop the consortium. As we turned a corner, I glanced back at the building, knowing that it would be the last time I saw it. The world was about to change, and we were going to be at the center of it. Whether the consortium could suppress the truth or not, we had given the world a glimpse of what lay beneath the surface, but I couldn't ignore the danger we were in. This wasn't just about stopping the frequencies anymore. It was about surviving. And if we failed, I feared that the world I had known would be gone forever. But then the alarm started. Loud, blaring sirens echoed through the building, signaling that they had realized something was wrong. They were locking down the facility. I could hear the frantic footsteps below me as security rushed to seal the exits. "Damn it," Ray muttered under his breath. "They're already blocking the upload. They've activated their countermeasures. Go, go, go!" Alex shouted as we sprinted into the night, not stopping until we reached our getaway car. In the distance, I could see the faint flicker of the city lights, but I knew that no matter how far we ran, the consortium would be on our heels. This was no longer just about stopping them. It was about surviving. It was a man, one of Alex's contacts, I assumed. "I'm here," Alex replied. "We need your help." The fight wasn't over. I had made a promise to myself and to the world that I would expose the truth, no matter the cost. Alex's face hardened. "We have to finish it now. If we don't, they'll stop us before we even get a chance." "Come on, Ray," I muttered under my breath. "You've got to do this." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had broken their system. We had taken the first step toward freeing the world from their control. But I also knew that the real fight was just beginning. The consortium wasn't going down without a fight. and neither were we. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back. The voice on the other end paused, then spoke with a hint of urgency. You've stirred up a hornet's nest. They're on high alert now. You'll need to disappear for good, or they'll hunt you down. We had done it. We had disrupted the transmission at the first hub. But I knew this was just the beginning. The consortium wasn't going to let us get away with this. The fight had only just begun, and the real battle was still ahead. Alex turned to me. We're on our own now, but we've got options. We'll find a way to bring this down. I felt a cold sweat form on my brow. The consortium was closing in. They knew what we were trying to do, and they were going to stop us. But we were too close to back down now. This was our chance to bring them down, to finally expose the truth. Seconds later, I received another message. We're in. I've triggered the shutdown. The frequencies are breaking down. We had taken a shot at the heart of their empire, and now there was no going back. But even as Alex spoke, I knew the truth. The clock was ticking and we were running out of time. Do whatever it takes, I said, steeling myself for the fight ahead. I couldn't help but smile. We had done it. The impossible was happening. The heart of the consortium's control system was being dismantled, piece by piece. Their invisible grip on the world was slipping, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. But then, my phone buzzed with a new message. This one was different. It wasn't from Alex or Ray. Ray nodded, his fingers moving even faster as he bypassed their firewalls. The screen flashed again, and this time the upload bar began to move. The data was going through. We were doing it. We were going to expose everything. But in the distance, I could hear sirens. The consortium was on their way. It was a warning. You've made a grave mistake. You're already too late. The shutdown can't be reversed. And now, we're coming for you. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized what was happening. The consortium wasn't done yet. The real fight was only just beginning.